The massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers slid open with their usual soft hiss. Ambassador Chen Wei walked through them for what everyone assumed would be just another routine session. She carried a simple data pad in her hands and wore the same calm expression she always had during these meetings. The other species barely glanced up from their discussions about trade routes and territorial disputes. Chen approached the central speaking platform, a circular area surrounded by the towering seats of the council members. The Veltar representatives sat in their crystal formations, their energy bodies flickering with mild irritation at yet another interruption. The mechanical collective delegates clicked and whirred softly, processing multiple data streams while maintaining minimal attention to the proceedings. High above, the gas-form ethereals drifted in their containment fields, emanating waves of boredom. "Honored council members," Chen began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "I come before you today to formally submit humanity's notice of withdrawal from the Galactic Council." She placed the data pad on the central podium. The document appeared on every species viewing system simultaneously. A simple 3-page form filled out in basic galactic standard. No elaborate explanations, no emotional appeals, no threats or demands. Just clean, precise language stating that humanity would be ending its membership in exactly one standard galactic cycle. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4.7 seconds before Councillor Vexhai of the Veltar spoke. "This is acceptable," the energy being pulsed through the translation matrix. "Humanity's contributions have been minimal. This withdrawal will reduce administrative overhead." Several other species murmured agreement. The Zephyrians, with their proud agricultural heritage, had long considered humans to be inferior farmers. The mighty hegemony viewed human technology as primitive and clunky. Even the peaceful Centaurians seemed relieved that they would no longer need to slow down their scientific discussions to explain basic concepts to the humans. Chen bowed slightly, a gesture that appeared almost submissive to the watching aliens. "We thank the Council for the opportunities provided during our membership. All formal transfers of responsibility will be completed within the specified time frame." As the human delegation filed out of the chambers, the Council quickly moved on to other business. The Quantum Commerce Guild had a new proposal for shipping regulations. The mining consortium wanted to discuss asteroid rights in the outer spiral. Nobody paid much attention as the chamber doors closed behind the humans for the final time. Within days, the withdrawal began across Council space. Human colonies started their evacuation procedures with the same quiet efficiency they had shown in everything else. No protests in the streets, no angry broadcasts across the communication networks, no desperate appeals to stay. Ships arrived at human settlements, loaded populations and essential equipment, and departed toward the unexplored regions beyond Council territory. The collective, masters of logistics, watched the human evacuation with mild professional interest. The humans moved with surprising organization for such a supposedly primitive species. Their ships followed optimal flight paths, their loading procedures minimized waste, and their departure schedules ran exactly on time. Still, the mechanical beings felt confident they could easily handle any systems the humans left behind. On the agricultural world of Zephyr Prime, the local administrators barely noticed as human workers finished their shifts and boarded transport vessels. The humans had mostly worked in maintenance roles anyway, fixing irrigation systems and calibrating atmospheric processors. The Zephyrians were certain their advanced biological mastery made human assistance unnecessary. The hegemony world saw human technicians complete their final repairs and pack up their simple tools. Good riddance, thought the energy-based Veltar. Their quantum reactors and fusion cores were clearly too advanced for human understanding anyway. They had only tolerated human workers because of council integration requirements. Even the ethereal communes watched peacefully as humans tended their meditation gardens one last time. The gas-form beings had always found human emotions crude and overwhelming. Their perfectly balanced ecosystems would surely function better without human interference, disrupting the delicate harmony. As the last human transport ships disappeared into hyperspace, heading for territories that most council species considered worthless frontier space, a sense of satisfaction settled over the galaxy. The council had shed dead weight. Administrative costs would decrease. Resources could be redistributed more efficiently among the truly advanced species. The withdrawal had been so quiet, so unremarkable, that many council worlds forgot humans had ever been there at all. It seemed like such a minor change in the grand scheme of galactic civilization. After all, what could one species of primitive bipeds really contribute to an alliance of the galaxy's most sophisticated civilizations? The answer would become clear soon enough. 2 months after the last human ship vanished into the void, Administrator Kethvo noticed something wrong with the morning reports from Zephyr Prime. The agricultural output numbers were down by 12%, which should have been impossible during peak growing season. The Zephyrians prided themselves on their biological mastery, and their crop yields had been steadily increasing for centuries. Kethvo dove deeper into the data, his forearms working multiple interfaces simultaneously. The irrigation systems on the western continent were reporting efficiency drops. The atmospheric processors maintaining perfect growing conditions were consuming 30% more power than normal. Most puzzling of all, several automated farming complexes had simply stopped responding to commands. "Run a diagnostic on Irrigation Network 7, he ordered his assistant. The results came back within minutes, and they made no sense. The system was functioning within normal parameters, but the water distribution patterns were somehow wrong. Plants in certain sectors were getting too much water, while others received too little. The mathematical models that had optimized Zephyr Prime's agriculture for generations no longer seemed to work. 3 sectors away, in the Kepler Nebula mining region, Foreman Drix was dealing with his own crisis. The asteroid mining platforms that had operated flawlessly for decades were experiencing cascade failures. First, Platform 7 had suffered a complete system shutdown. Then Platform 12 began producing ore with unacceptable contamination levels. Now Platform 3 was sending error messages that the collective technicians couldn't even interpret. The maintenance logs show everything was working perfectly last month. Drix reported to his supervisors through his mechanical communication array. The humans completed all scheduled repairs before their departure. All systems showed green status across the board. But the platforms kept failing. The sophisticated collective engineers, masters of mechanical systems throughout the galaxy, found themselves baffled by equipment they had assumed was simple human technology. The mining platforms used basic fusion power sources and standard extraction protocols, but somehow the actual implementation was beyond their understanding. On the trade world of Commerce Station Alpha, Director Youthmar was discovering similar problems. Shipping schedules that had run with clockwork precision for 50 years were falling apart. Cargo loads were being distributed inefficiently. Transport routes that had been optimized to perfection were now causing massive delays. "The logistics algorithms are the same ones we've always used," Youthmar told the emergency council meeting. "Nothing has changed in the software or hardware. But somehow everything is taking longer and costing more." The Quantum Commerce Guild had built their reputation on efficiency. Their mastery of space-time mathematics allowed them to calculate optimal shipping routes across vast galactic distances. Yet now their own calculations were producing results that made no practical sense. Meanwhile, on the peaceful ethereal homeworld of Serenity, the meditation gardens were beginning to die. The atmospheric processors that maintained perfect environmental balance were struggling. The delicate ecosystems that had flourished for millennia were showing signs of stress and decay. Elder Wispital, one of the most ancient ethereals, drifted through the failing gardens with growing concern. "The harmony is broken," the gas being communicated to the other elders. "The balance we have maintained for so long is slipping away." The ethereals had assumed their perfect understanding of natural harmony made them masters of their environment. They had tolerated human gardeners as a formality, never imagining that crude physical beings could understand anything about their sophisticated ecological balance. But as reports flooded in from across council space, a disturbing pattern emerged. Every world that had employed human workers was experiencing system failures. Every industry that had used human equipment was reporting problems. Every process that had involved human input was beginning to break down. The failures seemed minor at first. A slight decrease in efficiency here, a small increase in costs there, but they were spreading, and they were accelerating. Systems that had worked perfectly for generations were suddenly unreliable. Technologies that had been considered foolproof were producing errors. Most troubling of all, nobody could figure out why. The equipment the humans had left behind looked simple enough. The documentation they had provided seemed complete. The maintenance procedures appeared straightforward. Yet every attempt to replicate human results ended in failure. On Collective Prime, the mechanical engineers worked around the clock trying to understand human mining technology. On Zephyr Prime, biological specialists struggled to recreate human agricultural techniques. On Hegemony Worlds, energy masters found themselves baffled by human fusion systems. It was impossible. Humans were primitive. Their technology was basic. Their understanding was limited. How could simple human systems be beyond the comprehension of the galaxy's most advanced species? The answer was becoming clear, though nobody wanted to admit it yet. The humans hadn't been contributing basic labor and simple technology to the Council. They had been quietly holding everything together in ways that nobody had bothered to understand. And now they were gone. Council analyst Cricst was not the type of being to panic. As a Centaurian, her species had evolved beyond emotional responses millions of years ago, replacing feelings with pure logic and mathematical precision. When tasked with investigating the growing system failures across Council space, she approached the problem with characteristic analytical detachment. She began with simple data correlation. Her advanced neural processors mapped every reported failure against human presence records from the past 3 centuries. The results formed a pattern so clear that even basic artificial intelligences could have detected it. Every major system failure occurred in locations where humans had worked. Every efficiency drop matched the timeline of human departure. Every unexplained malfunction corresponded to equipment that humans had maintained. But correlation was not causation. Cricst dug deeper. She requisitioned maintenance records from 12 different sectors. The files revealed something extraordinary. Humans had been making modifications. Not the dramatic overhauls that advanced species typically implemented, but tiny adjustments. A slight change to power distribution here. A minor alteration to timing sequences there. Hundreds of small improvements that nobody had noticed or requested. On Zephyr Prime, human technicians had spent decades quietly adjusting irrigation systems. They had modified flow rates by fractions of a percent, altered soil composition with barely detectable mineral additions, and calibrated atmospheric processors with precision that seemed unnecessary. The Zephyrians had assumed these were routine maintenance procedures. But when Cricst analyzed the cumulative effect, she discovered something remarkable. The human modifications had increased agricultural output by 40% over 50 years. They had done this so gradually that nobody had noticed the improvements were happening. They had simply made tiny corrections that accumulated into massive gains. The pattern repeated everywhere humans had worked. On collective mining platforms, human engineers had optimized extraction protocols in ways that the mechanical beings hadn't requested or authorized. On hegemony energy stations, human technicians had improved fusion containment efficiency through modifications so subtle they fell below detection thresholds. Even on the ethereal worlds, humans had quietly adjusted atmospheric processors and environmental controls. The gas-form beings had believed their meditation gardens achieved perfect natural balance. In reality, human workers had been making constant micro-adjustments to maintain that balance artificially. Cricst's investigation revealed the scope of human integration into council systems. They had not been passive workers following instructions. They had been active problem solvers, constantly improving everything they touched. More disturbing still, they had done this without asking for credit, recognition, or additional compensation. The humans had seen problems that nobody else had noticed and fixed them without being asked. They had identified inefficiencies that supposedly didn't exist and corrected them quietly. They had improved systems that were already considered perfect by their designers. But how was this possible? Cricst accessed human educational records and scientific databases. What she found defied all logical expectations. Human science was indeed primitive compared to specialist council species. Their energy technology lagged behind the hegemony by centuries. Their biological understanding couldn't match Zephyrian expertise. Their mechanical knowledge seemed crude compared to collective mastery. Yet humans had one characteristic that no other council species possessed. They were generalists. While every other species had evolved toward specialization, developing incredible expertise in narrow fields, humans had retained broad knowledge across all scientific disciplines. A human engineer understood basic biology, chemistry, physics, and material science. A human farmer knew mechanics, meteorology, soil science, and plant genetics. A human technician could work with energy systems, mechanical devices, biological processes, and quantum mechanics within the same day. This generalist approach had seemed primitive to species that had mastered individual sciences completely, but Cricst now realized it gave humans a unique advantage. They could see connections between different systems that specialists missed. They could identify solutions that required knowledge from multiple fields. The mining platforms failed because they required integration of mechanical extraction, energy management, materials processing, and environmental control. The collective were masters of mechanics but had missed how human modifications improved the interaction between all four systems. The agricultural failures occurred because farming required biological knowledge, chemical understanding, mechanical systems, and atmospheric science working together. The Zephyrians were biological masters but had never understood how human improvements optimized the connections between different scientific disciplines. Every failing system shared the same characteristic. They required cross-disciplinary integration that only humans had provided. The council species were so specialized, they literally could not see problems that fell between their areas of expertise. Cricst compiled her findings into a comprehensive report. The evidence was undeniable. Humans had not been contributing basic labor to the council. They had been providing something far more valuable and much rarer. They had been the invisible glue holding galactic civilization together, solving problems that nobody else could even perceive. Her report landed on the council leadership's desks like a bomb. The primitive species they had dismissed as dead weight had been the foundation supporting everything else. The generalists they had considered inferior had been the only beings capable of maintaining the complex integration that made galactic civilization possible. The council had not shed dead weight when humans departed. They had cut out their own life support system. By the 6th month after human departure, the failures had moved beyond inconvenience into genuine crisis. Counselor Vexhi materialized in the emergency session chamber, with energy patterns flickering and distress patterns that no Veltar had displayed in living memory. The mighty hegemony, masters of energy manipulation throughout the galaxy, faced a problem they couldn't solve with all their advanced technology. The fusion cores on 17 major worlds are operating at 60% efficiency, Vexhi announced to the assembled council members. We have lost primary power on 4 mining colonies. 3 industrial planets are rationing energy to prevent complete grid collapse. The collective delegate, designation Prime Unit Theta, processed this information with mechanical precision. Hegemony energy mastery is considered the galactic standard. How can superior technology experience such failures? Vexhi's energy form pulsed with reluctant admission. The failure is not in our technology. Our fusion cores function perfectly. The problem lies in the quantum containment matrices that regulate power distribution. These components were manufactured by humans using processes we cannot replicate. The revelation sent shocked harmonics through the chamber. The hegemony had assumed the quantum matrices were simple components, the kind of basic manufacturing that any industrial species could produce. They had never examined them closely because they worked flawlessly and cost almost nothing. But when hegemony scientists finally analyzed human-manufactured matrices, they discovered impossibly complex molecular structures. The humans had somehow created quantum-stable materials using techniques that combined metallurgy, quantum physics, molecular chemistry, and exotic matter manipulation. No single hegemony specialist understood all these disciplines well enough to replicate the process. Elder Wisptal of the Ethereals drifted into the discussion area, their gas form exhibiting the slow movements that indicated deep distress. Our meditation gardens are dying, the elder communicated through harmonic vibrations. The atmospheric processors that maintain environmental balance have begun failing systematically. This news stunned the assembled species even more than the hegemony's crisis. The ethereal communes had achieved perfect environmental harmony millions of years ago. Their worlds were considered the pinnacle of ecological balance, studied by every species as examples of biological perfection. Ethereal environmental mastery is legendary, spoke Administrator Kethvo, his Zephyrian bioforms rippling with confusion. How can perfect ecosystems fail? Wispital's response carried harmonics of shame that no ethereal had expressed in recorded history. The balance was not natural. Human environmental engineers spent 3 centuries making constant micro-adjustments to atmospheric composition, soil chemistry, water pH levels, and nutrient distribution. We believed we were witnessing natural harmony. In reality, we were observing artificial perfection maintained by human intervention. The implications crashed over the council like a tsunami. Species after species reported similar discoveries. The Quantum Commerce Guild revealed that their supposedly optimal shipping algorithms had been quietly improved by human mathematicians who understood both space-time physics and practical logistics. The Zephyrians admitted that their record agricultural yields had depended on human-designed soil additives that their biological mastery couldn't replicate. Even more disturbing were the failed attempts at reverse engineering human solutions. The collective had deployed their finest mechanical engineers to understand human mining platforms. After months of analysis, they concluded that the platforms operated on principles that violated known physics. The humans had somehow created machines that were more efficient than theoretical maximum efficiency. The hegemony assigned their greatest energy specialists to decode human quantum matrices. The specialists reported that human manufacturing techniques appeared to manipulate matter at the quantum level, using energy patterns that shouldn't be possible with available technology, yet the matrices worked perfectly, suggesting that human understanding of energy-matter interaction exceeded hegemony knowledge in ways that defied explanation. The Zephyrians discovered that human agricultural improvements involved biological processes they couldn't classify. Human soil treatments created beneficial bacterial cultures that no Zephyrian scientist could identify or reproduce. Human plant modifications increased yields through genetic mechanisms that appeared to operate outside known biological laws. Across council space, infrastructure collapsed as the hidden human contributions became visible through their absence. Communication networks that had operated flawlessly for centuries began experiencing delays and data corruption. The humans had apparently optimized network protocols in ways that nobody had requested or noticed. Transportation systems that had moved cargo efficiently across galactic distances started suffering cascade failures. Human-designed routing algorithms had quietly eliminated bottlenecks and improved traffic flow through methods that transportation specialists couldn't understand or replicate. Even basic manufacturing suffered as production facilities lost access to human-made components. The humans had been producing thousands of small parts and materials that other species had considered too simple and cheap to manufacture themselves. Now they discovered that these simple components used production techniques that required expertise. Across multiple scientific disciplines, the crisis deepened when species attempted to contact each other for mutual assistance. They discovered that many interspecies communication protocols had been developed by human linguists and anthropologists. Without human cultural interpreters, diplomatic discussions became confused and inefficient. Trade agreements fell apart as species realized they had been relying on human economic analysts to identify fair exchange rates and mutually beneficial terms. The humans had quietly served as neutral mediators in thousands of commercial disputes, using their generalist perspective to find solutions that satisfied all parties. Military cooperation between council species broke down when they discovered that joint defense systems had been integrated by human engineers who understood the technologies of multiple species. Without human technical liaison officers, different military technologies couldn't communicate or coordinate effectively. The cascade failures revealed the true scope of human integration into galactic civilization. They had not been passive participants or junior partners. They had been the essential connective tissue that made cooperation between highly specialized species possible. The Council faced a terrible realization. In their arrogance and specialization, they had become dependent on the one species they had considered least valuable. The generalists they had dismissed as primitive had been the only beings capable of maintaining the complex interdisciplinary systems that modern galactic civilization required. Without humans, the Council was discovering that their advanced specialization had made them helpless. The emergency council session convened exactly 1 standard year after humanity's quiet departure. The once magnificent chamber now displayed visible signs of the ongoing crisis. Several ethereal containment fields flickered with power fluctuations. The collective delegates moved with less precision than their usual mechanical perfection. their systems clearly struggling with maintenance issues. Even the mighty Veltar energy beings appeared dimmer than normal, their forms betraying the strain of operating with failing infrastructure. Supreme Counselor Thanevel called the session to order with unprecedented urgency. The ancient Centaurian had overseen the Council for 3 centuries, but never faced a crisis that threatened the foundation of galactic civilization itself. The purpose of this session is clear, Thanevel announced, his mathematical mind presenting facts with cold precision. We must formally request humanity's return to the Council, with full restoration of previous status and additional considerations to be negotiated. The admission hung in the chamber like a toxic cloud. Representative after representative stood to acknowledge the same humiliating truth. The species they had dismissed as primitives, the resource drain they had celebrated losing, had been the irreplaceable foundation of everything they had built. Counselor Vexhai materialized first, the proud energy being's form flickering with patterns that conveyed absolute defeat. The hegemony formally acknowledges our error. Our energy mastery means nothing without human quantum matrices to regulate power distribution. We have 17 worlds facing complete power grid collapse within the next standard month. Administrator Kethavos' bioforms displayed the deepest shame colors known to Zephyrian culture. Our agricultural output has dropped by 60%. We face potential famine on 12 worlds. The humans understood biological systems in ways that our specialization blinded us to seeing. Prime Unit Theta of the collective processed data for several long moments before responding. Mechanical analysis confirms human technological integration exceeded all previous models. Collective mining efficiency has decreased by 73%. Our manufacturing capabilities have been reduced to 40% of previous levels. Elder Wisptal drifted forward with movements so slow they indicated species-level despair. The ethereal communes formally acknowledged that our environmental mastery was an illusion. Human engineers maintained our ecological balance through constant intervention that we never detected. Our meditation gardens are dying, and we lack the knowledge to save them. Species after species delivered similar admissions. The Quantum Commerce Guild revealed that interstellar trade had become so inefficient that some sectors faced economic collapse. The mining consortium reported that resource extraction had slowed to levels that threatened industrial civilization. Even the military partnerships had dissolved as different species technologies could no longer coordinate. Without human integration specialists, the formal apology and invitation for humanity's return was drafted with unprecedented speed and desperation. Every major species contributed resources to the message, making offers that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Full council membership with expanded voting rights, guaranteed representation on all major committees, exclusive contracts for integration and optimization services, even territorial concessions in prime galactic real estate. The message was transmitted through the fastest communication networks to human space in the Outer Rim territories. The response arrived within days, carried by a single human diplomatic vessel that entered council space with the same quiet efficiency that had marked humanity's departure. Ambassador Chen Wei returned to the same chamber where she had announced humanity's withdrawal. She looked exactly the same, still calm and professional, still carrying a simple data pad. But now every species in the chamber watched her with desperate attention instead of casual dismissal. Honored council members, Chen began, using the same respectful tone she had always employed. Humanity has received your generous offer to return to council membership. The silence stretched as every representative held their breath, waiting for salvation. We are grateful for the acknowledgement of our contributions and the recognition of their value, Chen continued. However, after careful consideration by our leadership, humanity must respectfully decline to return to council membership. The words hit the chamber like a physical blow. Energy beings flickered in shock. Mechanical units seized with processing errors. Bioforms shifted to colors that indicated species-level panic. Our time outside council space has been remarkably productive, Chen explained with the same professional courtesy. Free from the limitations and assumptions of council protocols, humanity has been able to develop new approaches to the challenges we had been quietly managing. We have discovered that independence suits us well. She activated her datapad, and information appeared on every species' display systems. The data showed human colonies thriving in the Outer Rim, establishing trade relationships with non-council species, developing technologies that integrated multiple scientific disciplines without the artificial barriers that council specialization had created. Humanity bears no ill will toward the council species, Chen stated. We understand that our departure has created difficulties, and we sympathize with these challenges. As a gesture of goodwill, we are providing complete technical documentation for every system we designed or modified during our council membership. The data package was enormous. Detailed instructions for manufacturing quantum matrices, complete specifications for biological soil treatments, step-by-step procedures for atmospheric processor optimization, full documentation for network protocols, transportation algorithms, and communication systems. But as the council species examined the technical data, they realized it was simultaneously comprehensive and useless. The instructions required knowledge across multiple scientific disciplines that none of them possessed. Understanding quantum matrix manufacturing demanded expertise in metallurgy, quantum physics, molecular chemistry, and exotic matter manipulation simultaneously. No council species had individuals who understood all these fields well enough to follow the procedures. The humans had given them everything they needed to rebuild their civilization, but it also demonstrated that only humans possessed the generalist knowledge necessary to implement the solutions. The technical documentation is our final contribution to the Council, Chen announced. Humanity wishes all Council species success in their future endeavors. We hope you will find ways to adapt these procedures to your specialized knowledge bases. As the human delegation prepared to leave, Chen delivered humanity's final message to the galaxy that had rejected them. We have learned much from our time in Council space, she said. Most importantly, we learned that we are better suited to forging our own path than trying to fit into systems designed by others for others. The galaxy is vast, and there is room for many different approaches to civilization. The chamber doors closed behind the humans for the second and final time, but now instead of relief, the council species felt only the crushing weight of their own short-sightedness. They had gotten exactly what they thought they wanted, a galaxy without humans. They had simply discovered too late that it wasn't a galaxy they could live in. In the months that followed, some council species managed to partially implement human procedures through massive cooperative efforts that pooled their specialized knowledge. Others found ways to trade with non-council civilizations for the components and services they needed. A few even began developing their own generalist approaches to science and engineering. But the galaxy had changed forever. The Council learned that specialization for all its benefits came with a price. They had become so focused on perfecting their individual strengths that they had lost the ability to see the whole picture. Humanity, meanwhile, continued building something new in the Outer Rim territories. Free from the constraints of Council assumptions about their capabilities, they developed technologies and societies that integrated knowledge in ways the galaxy had never seen. The Council had taught humanity a valuable lesson about the importance of independence and self-reliance. Now they were learning an equally valuable lesson about the price of arrogance and the hidden costs of dismissing those who see the world differently. The humans had departed quietly, but their absence would echo through galactic history for millennia to come. 5 years had passed since humanity's final departure from Council space, and the galaxy had learned to live with the consequences of their absence. Some species had adapted better than others. The collective had managed to restore basic mining operations through brute force engineering, though their efficiency remained at barely half of human-optimized levels. The Zephyrians had prevented widespread famine by switching to simpler crops that required less sophisticated agricultural management. But adaptation came with costs that nobody had anticipated. The Council species had been forced to redirect enormous resources toward maintaining systems that humans had once managed effortlessly. Scientific research had slowed as specialists struggled to understand interdisciplinary problems. Economic growth had stagnated as trade became more expensive and less efficient. Most troubling of all, the younger generations of Council species were beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about their society's fundamental assumptions. On Collective Prime, a young mechanical engineer designated Unit 7 Alpha had spent 3 years studying human technical documentation. Unlike the older generation who had dismissed human methods as primitive, 7 Alpha approached the materials with fresh optical sensors and an unbiased processing matrix. The human integration techniques are not primitive, 7 Alpha reported to the Engineering Council. They represent a completely different approach to problem solving that we have never considered. They do not optimize individual components for maximum performance. Instead, they optimize entire systems for maximum harmony. The statement caused significant processing delays among the senior engineers. Collective philosophy had always focused on perfecting each component to its theoretical maximum. The idea of deliberately accepting suboptimal component performance to improve overall system function was almost incomprehensible. But 7 Alpha had evidence. By applying human integration principles to mining platform design, the young engineer had created a prototype that operated at 75% of original human-optimized efficiency. It was still inferior to human engineering, but it was the best performance any collective had achieved since the departure. The humans understood something we are only beginning to discover. 7 Alpha explained to increasingly interested senior engineers. Perfect components do not automatically create perfect systems. Sometimes components must work together in ways that reduce individual performance, but increase collective capability. Similar revelations were occurring across Council space. On Zephyr Prime, a young agricultural scientist named Kelethon had begun experimenting with human growing techniques. Instead of trying to maximize the genetic potential of individual plants, she started optimizing entire ecosystems for long-term stability and productivity. The results challenged everything Zephyrian science had taught for millennia. Kelethon's fields produced slightly less food per plant than traditional methods, but they required less water, fewer nutrients, and almost no maintenance. More importantly, they remained productive for much longer periods without soil degradation. Human agriculture was not about growing the best plants, Kelethon explained to her skeptical colleagues. It was about creating sustainable systems that could maintain themselves indefinitely. They thought in cycles that spanned centuries, not seasons. Even the mighty hegemony was experiencing philosophical upheaval. Young energy specialist Nextai had managed to partially reproduce human quantum matrix manufacturing through a technique that violated every principle of hegemony engineering. Instead of pursuing maximum energy density, Nextai had focused on creating stable, self-regulating systems that required minimal maintenance. We have always believed that superior technology meant pushing every system to its absolute limits. Nextai reported to the Hegemony Science Council. Humans demonstrated that superior technology might mean creating systems that never approach their limits at all. The concept was revolutionary. Hegemony energy systems had always operated at near maximum capacity, requiring constant monitoring and frequent replacement. Human-designed systems operated at comfortable margins with built-in safety factors and self-correction capabilities. But the most significant changes were happening among the ethereals. The peaceful gas-form beings had always prided themselves on achieving perfect harmony through pure understanding of natural balance. The discovery that their harmony had been artificially maintained by human engineering had shattered their philosophical foundations. Young ethereal Driftara had spent years studying human environmental management techniques, trying to understand how crude physical beings had achieved what millions of years of ethereal evolution had failed to accomplish. The answer was humbling beyond measure. Humans did not seek to control nature, Driftara communicated to the assembled elders. They sought to understand nature's own self-regulation mechanisms and provide gentle assistance when those mechanisms were stressed. They worked with natural systems instead of trying to perfect them. The revelation transformed ethereal understanding of their own history. They had believed their meditation gardens represented perfect natural harmony. In reality, their worlds had been slowly degrading for millions of years as their pursuit of perfection had gradually eliminated the natural variability that healthy ecosystems required. Humans had recognized this degradation and had spent centuries implementing subtle corrections that restored natural balance without the ethereals ever noticing. They had saved ethereal civilization while allowing the gas-form beings to believe they had achieved perfection through their own wisdom. These discoveries created unprecedented cooperation between council species. For the first time in galactic history, specialists from different fields began working together to understand human integration techniques. Collective engineers collaborated with Zephyrian biologists to create agricultural systems that combined mechanical precision with biological understanding. Hegemony energy specialists worked with ethereal environmental experts to develop power systems that operated in harmony with natural cycles. The results were encouraging but limited. Multi-species teams could partially replicate human achievements, but only through massive coordination efforts that required resources far beyond what humans had used. A task that one human engineer could complete in a few days required teams of specialists working for months. Still, progress was progress. Council species were slowly learning to think beyond their traditional specializations. Universities began offering courses in interdisciplinary studies. Research institutions started hiring specialists from multiple fields to work on single projects. Some worlds even began encouraging their citizens to develop knowledge across multiple scientific disciplines. But even as the council species adapted to their new reality, reports began filtering in from the galactic rim about human activities. Independent traders spoke of remarkable human colonies that had achieved technological capabilities beyond anything seen in council space. Exploration vessels reported human settlements using energy, sources, and manufacturing techniques that seemed to violate known physical laws. Most intriguing were the stories about human relationships with non-council species. Apparently, humanity had made contact with several civilizations that had never joined the council, and these partnerships were producing extraordinary results. Humans seemed to have a unique ability to understand and work with any form of consciousness, regardless of how alien their thought processes might be. The council leadership watched these developments with growing concern. They had assumed that human capabilities were limited to basic integration and optimization. The possibility that humans might be developing truly advanced technologies outside council oversight created new worries about galactic power balance. Some council species began quietly attempting to establish trade relationships with human colonies. These efforts were politely but firmly declined. Humanity had made their choice to remain independent, and they showed no interest in returning to any formal relationship with the council, no matter how beneficial the terms might be. The message was clear. The council had had their chance to work with humanity as equals. They had chosen to treat humans as inferior partners instead. Now they would have to watch from a distance as humanity built something new and potentially far more advanced than anything the council had achieved. The galaxy was changing, and for the first time in millennia, the council species were not leading that change. They were struggling to catch up to ideas and techniques developed by the species they had once dismissed as primitive. The quiet departure of humanity had created ripples that continued to spread throughout galactic civilization, and those ripples were only beginning to reveal their true magnitude.